The morning air felt heavy inside the federal courthouse as people slowly filled the wooden benches. Judge Harrison Blackwood adjusted his black robe and took his seat at the tall bench overlooking the courtroom. He had been a judge for 15 years, and his stern face rarely showed any emotion. Today felt different, though. His hands were slightly shaking as he picked up his gavel. This wasn't just any ordinary case. The courtroom was packed with reporters, government officials, and curious citizens who had heard whispers about what might be revealed today. Everyone seemed to sense that something big was about to happen. The case involved serious accusations of corruption in high places, and people had been talking about it for weeks. Kash Patel walked into the courtroom carrying a thick folder of documents. He looked calm and confident, despite knowing that what he was about to present would shock everyone in the room. As a key witness in this federal corruption case, he had spent months gathering evidence that would expose a web of lies and illegal activities reaching into the highest levels of government. The judge watched Patel take his place at the witness stand. Something about the way Patel moved, the confidence in his step, made Blackwood's stomach turn. The judge knew this man had the power to destroy lives with whatever was in that folder. What Blackwood didn't expect was that his own life might be one of them. As the morning progressed, Patel began presenting his evidence piece by piece. He spoke clearly and calmly, explaining complex financial records and documents in a way that everyone could understand. The first few pieces of evidence dealt with government contracts that had been awarded unfairly. Several powerful businessmen had paid bribes to secure deals worth millions of dollars. The courtroom was dead silent as Patel continued. He showed bank records, email exchanges, and recorded phone conversations. Each piece of evidence was more damaging than the last. People in the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats as they realized how deep the corruption went. Judge Blackwood tried to maintain his composure, but his face was getting redder by the minute. He kept clearing his throat and adjusting his glasses. The other lawyers in the room noticed his unusual behavior, but they assumed he was just concerned about the serious nature of the case. Then Patel moved to the next section of his evidence. This part involved corruption within the court system itself. He began talking about judges who had received payments in exchange for favorable rulings. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as everyone realized what this meant. Patel pulled out a new set of documents. These showed financial transactions between certain judges and the same corrupt businessmen he had been discussing earlier. The amounts were staggering. Some judges had received hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes over several years. Judge Blackwood's hands were now visibly trembling. He picked up his water glass and took a long drink, trying to buy himself time to think. His mind was racing. How much did this man really know? How far back did his investigation go? The evidence kept coming. Patel showed luxury vacation receipts, expensive gifts, and cash payments that had been carefully hidden from tax authorities. He explained how the corrupt network operated, with middlemen arranging meetings between judges and businessmen in expensive restaurants and private clubs. One particular document caught everyone's attention. It was a list of cases where these corrupt judges had made suspicious rulings. The pattern was clear. Whenever certain businessmen or their companies appeared in court, they almost always won their cases, even when the evidence was against them. The reporters in the room were frantically taking notes. This was turning into one of the biggest corruption scandals in recent memory. Some of them were already thinking about the headlines they would write later that day. Judge Blackwood was finding it harder and harder to concentrate. Every new piece of evidence felt like a punch to his stomach. He kept thinking about his own bank accounts, his own meetings with certain individuals, his own decisions that might not look so good under scrutiny. Patel then moved to a section about luxury cars and expensive watches that had been given as gifts to various officials. He showed photographs of these items and explained how investigators had traced their purchases back to the corrupt businessmen. The web of corruption was becoming clearer with each revelation. The audience was completely captivated. Many had suspected that corruption existed in high places, but seeing the actual evidence laid out so clearly was shocking. Some people in The courtroom were shaking their heads in disbelief while others were nodding as if this confirmed what they had suspected all along. As the morning wore on, Judge Blackwood became increasingly agitated. He started interrupting Patel more frequently, asking unnecessary questions and making comments that seemed designed to slow down the presentation. Other people in the courtroom began to notice his strange behavior. The court reporter, who had been working in this courthouse for over 20 years, had never seen Judge Blackwood act this way. Usually he was known for being calm and professional, even in the most difficult cases. Today he seemed nervous and distracted. Patel remained calm throughout all of this. He answered every question patiently and continued presenting his evidence in an organized, methodical way. He seemed to understand that the judge was trying to disrupt his presentation, but he refused to be thrown off course. The tension in the room continued to build as more evidence was presented. Each new document seemed to implicate more people in the corruption scandal. The network of illegal activities was much larger than anyone had imagined. By late morning, Patel had presented evidence involving dozens of corrupt officials. The scope of the scandal was breathtaking. It involved government contracts, court cases, business licenses, and regulatory approvals. The corrupt network had been operating for years, stealing millions of dollars from taxpayers. Judge Blackwood was now sweating despite the cool temperature in the courtroom. He kept looking at the clock on the wall, as if hoping this nightmare would end soon. But Patel showed no signs of slowing down. In fact, he seemed to be building towards something even more significant. The final documents of the morning session were the most damaging yet. These involved specific judges who had been caught on hidden cameras accepting bribes. The quality of the video evidence was crystal clear, and the conversations were easy to understand. As Patel prepared to present this video evidence, Judge Blackwood realized that his worst fears were about to come true. The calm professional demeanor he had maintained for 15 years was about to crumble completely. The evidence was leading directly to him, and there was nowhere left to hide. The courtroom was now so quiet that people could hear their own heartbeats. Everyone sensed that something explosive was about to happen. The tension was unbearable, and Judge Blackwood knew that in just a few moments, his entire world was going to collapse. The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. Kash Patel reached into his folder and pulled out a tablet computer. The large screen at the front of the courtroom flickered to life, and everyone leaned forward in their seats. Judge Blackwood's face went completely white as he realized what was about to happen. The video started playing, and the sound was crystal clear. It showed a fancy restaurant with dim lighting and expensive decorations. At a corner table sat a man in judicial robes having dinner with several well-dressed businessmen. The camera angle was perfect, capturing every word of their conversation. In the video, the judge was clearly accepting an envelope full of cash while discussing an upcoming case. The businessman explained exactly what kind of ruling he needed, and the judge nodded along, counting the money under the table. The conversation was so casual, as if this kind of thing happened all the time. The real Judge Blackwood watched in horror as his own voice filled the courtroom. On the video, he was laughing and joking with the corrupt businessman, talking about expensive vacations they had planned together. He even made jokes about the legal system, calling honest judges fools who work for peanuts. People in the courtroom gasped as they heard these words. Some covered their mouths in shock. The reporters were writing as fast as they could, knowing this was the story of their careers. The court stenographer's fingers were flying across her machine, capturing every word for the official record. But the video wasn't finished. It showed several more meetings between the same judge and different businessmen. In each meeting, money changed hands and specific cases were discussed. The judge even bragged about how easy it was to manipulate the legal system when you knew the right people. Judge Blackwood felt like he was having a nightmare, but he couldn't wake up. His carefully constructed life was falling apart in front of hundreds of people. His reputation, his career, his family's future, everything was being destroyed in real time. The video continued for what felt like hours, though it was only about 10 minutes long. Each scene was more damaging than the last. In one particularly shocking moment, The judge on the video actually laughed while discussing how he had sent an innocent man to prison to protect one of his corrupt business partners. That's when something inside Judge Blackwood finally snapped. The pressure, the fear, the humiliation. It all became too much to bear. He couldn't sit there quietly anymore and watch his life being destroyed. His face turned bright red, and his hands started shaking uncontrollably. "Stop this right now," he suddenly shouted, his voice echoing through the entire courtroom. Everyone jumped in their seats, startled by the sudden outburst. "This is completely fabricated. These videos are fake." But Patel remained calm and continued the presentation. He explained how the videos had been authenticated by multiple experts and how the FBI had verified their accuracy. He showed the metadata, proving when and where the videos were recorded. Judge Blackwood wasn't listening anymore. He was beyond reason now, consumed by panic and rage. "I said, stop this nonsense," he screamed, pounding his gavel so hard that it cracked. "You're making up lies to destroy innocent people." The entire courtroom fell silent except for the judge's heavy breathing. Even the babies in the audience seemed to sense the tension and stopped crying. Everyone was staring at the judge, shocked by his unprofessional behavior. "Mr. Patel," the judge continued, his voice getting louder with each word, "you are clearly here for political purposes. You're trying to destroy the integrity of our judicial system with these fabricated materials." Patel looked up calmly and replied, "Your Honor, these videos were obtained through a legal federal investigation. Every piece of evidence has been properly verified and authenticated according to standard legal procedures." This response only made Judge Blackwood more furious. He stood up from his chair, towering over the courtroom like an angry giant. "Don't you dare lecture me about legal procedures. I've been a judge for 15 years. I know fabricated evidence when I see it." The court security officers looked at each other nervously. They had never seen anything like this before. Should they intervene? Could they even arrest a sitting judge in his own courtroom? They weren't sure what to do. "These so-called businessmen are probably actors," Judge Blackwood continued shouting. "This whole thing is a setup to make honest judges look bad. You're destroying the reputation of hard-working public servants." The irony of his words wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Here was a corrupt judge claiming to defend honest judges, while the evidence of his own corruption was playing on the big screen behind him. One of the defense attorneys tried to calm the situation. "Your Honor, perhaps we should take a brief recess to—" "No recess," the judge screamed, cutting him off. "We're going to put an end to this circus right now. Mr. Patel, you are in contempt of court. I'm ordering you to stop this presentation immediately." But the legal process couldn't be stopped so easily. The federal prosecutors stood up and reminded the judge that this was a federal case and that Patel had every right to present his evidence. They also pointed out that the judge's behavior was highly inappropriate and potentially illegal. This only made Judge Blackwood angrier. "Don't tell me what's appropriate in my own courtroom. I decide what evidence gets presented here, and I'm telling you that these fake videos will not be allowed." He grabbed his gavel and started pounding it repeatedly, each strike echoing through the room like a gunshot. "Order! Order in the court!" he kept shouting, even though everyone was already sitting quietly. The news reporters were having a field day. They had come expecting to cover a corruption trial, but now they were witnessing something much more dramatic: the complete mental breakdown of a sitting federal judge. Their cameras were capturing every moment of his meltdown. Patel stood there, calmly throughout the entire outburst, waiting for the judge to finish. He had expected this kind of reaction. When people are caught in serious crimes, they often lash out at the people exposing them, rather than accepting responsibility for their actions. "Your Honor," Patel said quietly when there was a brief pause. In the shouting, "The American people deserve to know the truth about corruption in our government. These videos are real, and they show real crimes that have hurt real people." "Lies. All lies," Judge Blackwood screamed back. "You're nothing but a political operative trying to destroy our institutions. I won't let you turn my courtroom into a propaganda show." The judge's face was now so red that people worried he might have a heart attack. Sweat was pouring down his forehead, and his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his gavel. The court reporter later said it was the most dramatic scene she had ever witnessed in over 20 years of court reporting. The usually dignified courtroom had turned into chaos, with a federal judge screaming at a witness, while evidence of his own crimes played on the screen behind him. But the worst was yet to come. As Judge Blackwood continued his tirade, Patel quietly reached into his folder once again. He still had more evidence to present, and it was about to make the judge's outburst look like a gentle whisper compared to what was coming next. Despite Judge Blackwood's desperate attempts to stop the proceedings, Kash Patel remained completely calm. He had been preparing for this moment for months, and he knew that the truth had to come out no matter how much noise the judge made. The courtroom was still buzzing with tension from the outburst, but Patel simply waited for quiet, and then continued with his presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patel said in a steady voice, "what you're about to see next will show you exactly how deep this corruption goes. These aren't just random crimes. This is a carefully organized system that has been stealing from the American people for years." He clicked to the next slide, and a detailed financial chart appeared on the screen. The numbers were staggering. Over the past 5 years, Judge Blackwood had received over $2 million in bribes, gifts, and illegal payments. The money had come from dozens of different sources, all carefully hidden through fake consulting fees and shell companies. The chart showed everything. Luxury vacation trips to Hawaii and Europe that cost more than most people make in a year. A brand new BMW that was registered under his wife's name, but paid for by corrupt businessmen. Even expensive jewelry and watches that had been given as gifts for favorable court rulings. People in the courtroom couldn't believe what they were seeing. $2 million was more money than many of them would see in their entire lifetimes. And this judge had been taking it as payment for corrupting the justice system that was supposed to protect them. But the financial records were just the beginning. Patel then showed phone records that proved Judge Blackwood had been in constant contact with the corrupt businessmen. Sometimes they would talk for hours, planning which cases to manipulate and how much money would change hands. One particularly shocking phone conversation had been recorded by the FBI. In it, Judge Blackwood was heard laughing about a case where he had ruled against a small business owner who was fighting a large corporation. The small business was clearly in the right, but the judge had ruled against them anyway because the corporation had paid him $50,000. That little shop owner never knew what hit him, Judge Blackwood's voice said on the recording. He thought he could win just because he had the law on his side. Poor fool doesn't understand how the real world works. The laughter on the recording was cold and heartless. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about a complete betrayal of everything the justice system was supposed to represent. Judge Blackwood had been destroying innocent people's lives for cash. The evidence kept coming, and each new piece was more damaging than the last. Bank records showed that Judge Blackwood had been careful to spread his illegal income across multiple accounts, trying to hide it from tax authorities. He had even opened accounts in his children's names to avoid detection. Patel showed how the corrupt network operated like a well-oiled machine. The businessmen would identify cases they needed to win, then approach Judge Blackwood through intermediaries. The price would be negotiated based on how much money was at stake in the case. Small cases might cost $10,000, while major corporate disputes could cost hundreds of thousands. The judge had even kept a secret calendar showing which cases had been arranged and how much he would be paid for each one. This calendar was found during an FBI raid on his home office, hidden inside a fake book on his shelf. As more evidence was presented, other people in the courtroom began to realize they might have been victims of this corruption themselves. Several citizens who had lost cases in Judge Blackwood's court were in the audience, and they were now understanding why justice had seemed so unfair. One woman in the back row started crying quietly. She had lost her house in a foreclosure case that Judge Blackwood had handled 2 years ago. The bank's lawyers had made several legal errors, but the judge had ruled in their favor anyway. Now she knew why. The bank had paid him to ignore their mistakes. The evidence also showed how Judge Blackwood had influenced other judges to participate in the corruption network. He had used his seniority and reputation to convince younger judges that taking bribes was just how business gets done in the federal court system. Text messages between Judge Blackwood and other corrupt judges showed them joking about honest judges who refused to take bribes. They called them Boy Scouts and idealists who would never get rich. They even had a secret group chat where they would share information about which businessmen were willing to pay the most for favorable rulings. The FBI had been watching this corruption network for over 3 years. They had installed hidden cameras in restaurants, recorded phone calls, and even had undercover agents posing as corrupt businessmen. The evidence they had gathered was overwhelming and undeniable. Patel showed surveillance footage from a dozen different meetings where Judge Blackwood had accepted bribes. In some videos, he was so casual about it that he would count the money right there at the restaurant table. In others, he would stuff envelopes full of cash into his briefcase while discussing which lawyer would win the case. One particularly disturbing piece of evidence showed how Judge Blackwood had deliberately sent innocent people to prison to protect his corrupt business partners. In 3 separate cases, he had ignored clear evidence of innocence because convicting these people would benefit the companies that were paying him. The families of these wrongly convicted people were in the courtroom, and they were devastated to learn that their loved ones were in prison not because of justice, but because of greed. Years of their lives had been stolen, not by the legal system, but by one corrupt man's desire for money. Judge Blackwood sat frozen in his chair as all of this evidence was presented. His earlier rage had turned into a kind of shocked silence. He was watching his entire life's work being revealed as a fraud. Every case he had handled, every decision he had made, was now under suspicion. The evidence also showed how the corruption had affected the broader community. Businesses that should have failed were kept alive through favorable court rulings, while honest businesses were destroyed by unfair legal decisions. Construction projects that should have been stopped for safety reasons were allowed to continue because the contractors had paid bribes. Environmental cases had been fixed to allow companies to pollute local communities. Worker safety cases had been dismissed even when employees had been seriously injured due to corporate negligence. The corruption had touched every aspect of life in the community. Patel then presented evidence showing how Judge Blackwood had hidden his illegal income from his own family. His wife and children had no idea where their sudden wealth was coming from. They thought his judicial salary had somehow increased dramatically, or that he had made smart investments. The judge had even lied to his own accountant and tax preparer, creating fake documents to explain his additional income. He had claimed the money came from consulting work and speaking fees, when in reality it was all from bribes and corruption. As the evidence presentation continued, it became clear that this wasn't just about one corrupt judge. This was about a systematic breakdown of the justice system that had been going on for years. Judge Blackwood was just one part of a much larger criminal enterprise that had infected multiple levels of government. The weight of all this evidence was crushing. Every person in that courtroom understood that they had been living under a corrupted system of justice. The very institution they had trusted to protect them had been for sale to the highest bidder. And Judge Blackwood, who had been shouting and raging just minutes before, now sat in complete silence, knowing that there was no way to deny what everyone had just seen and heard. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The courtroom had never been this quiet. Even the sound of people breathing seemed too loud in the heavy silence that followed Patel's devastating evidence presentation. Judge Blackwood sat motionless in his high chair, staring down at the documents spread across his desk. His hands, which had been shaking with rage just minutes before, were now completely still. For the first time in his 15-year career as a judge, Harrison Blackwood truly understood what it felt like to be powerless. All his life he had been the one with authority. He made the decisions. He controlled the courtroom. People stood when he entered and sat when he told them to. But now, surrounded by undeniable proof of his crimes, he had no power left at all. The evidence was overwhelming. There was no way to explain away the videos, the bank records, the recorded phone calls, or the testimony from multiple witnesses. Every excuse he could think of sounded ridiculous, even in his own mind. How do you explain away $2 million in illegal payments? How do you justify years of selling justice to the highest bidder? Judge Blackwood picked up one of the financial documents from his desk with trembling fingers. It showed a payment of $75,000 that he had received for dismissing a case against a construction company. The company had been accused of using cheap materials that made buildings unsafe, but he had thrown out the case after receiving the money. As he stared at the numbers on the page, he remembered the day he made that decision. He had felt so clever back then, so sure that no one would ever find out. The money had paid for his daughter's college tuition, and he had convinced himself that he was just being a good father. But now he realized that his good fathering had put innocent people in danger. His mind began racing through all the other cases where he had taken bribes. The small business owner who lost everything because a large corporation paid $50,000 for a favorable ruling. The environmental case where he allowed a factory to keep polluting a neighborhood's water supply. The workers who were injured because he dismissed their safety complaints after their employer paid him off. Each memory hit him like a physical blow. These weren't just numbers on a page or abstract legal decisions. These were real people whose lives he had destroyed for money. Families who lost their homes. Workers who got sick from chemicals. Small business owners who had to close their shops and fire their employees. Judge Blackwood had always told himself that he was just one judge, that his individual decisions didn't really matter in the big picture. But seeing all the evidence, laid out together, he realized how wrong he had been. His corruption had created a ripple effect that had hurt hundreds, maybe thousands of people over the years. The weight of this realization was crushing. He thought about his own family, sitting at home completely unaware of what was happening in this courtroom. His wife was probably making dinner, expecting him to come home with stories about another routine day at work. His children were likely doing homework or playing with friends, proud that their father was an important judge. What would he tell them? How could he explain that their comfortable lifestyle had been built on stolen money? That their nice house, their family vacations, their private school tuition, all of it had come from bribing justice away from people who deserved it? Judge Blackwood's chest began to feel tight. His breathing became shallow and rapid. The fluorescent lights in the courtroom seemed too bright and the walls felt like they were closing in on him. He loosened his tie, but it didn't help. Nothing could help him now. He looked out at the faces in the courtroom, and for the first time, he really saw them. These weren't just observers or legal professionals. Some of these people had appeared in his court over the years. Some of them had lost cases that they should have won. Some of them had trusted the system to give them justice, and he had betrayed that trust for money. An elderly man in the third row caught his attention. Judge Blackwood remembered him now. He had been fighting an insurance company that refused to pay for his wife's cancer treatment. The man had a strong case, with clear evidence that the insurance company was violating their contract. But the insurance company had offered Judge Blackwood $25,000 to rule against the old man. Judge Blackwood had taken the money, and the man's wife had died without getting the treatment she needed. The old man was in the courtroom, today, and his eyes were filled with a pain that went far deeper than anger. It was the pain of someone who had lost everything because the system he trusted had failed him. Looking at that man's face, Judge Blackwood felt something break inside his chest. It wasn't his heart stopping, though it felt like it might be. It was something deeper, the final collapse of all the lies he had been telling himself for years. He had convinced himself that everyone was corrupt, that taking bribes was just how the system worked. He had told himself that he deserved the money because judges weren't paid enough. He had rationalized every illegal payment by saying that he was just evening the playing field in a world where everyone cheated. But none of that was true. Most judges were honest. Most people in the legal system were trying to do the right thing. He had been the exception, not the rule. He had chosen greed over justice, money over integrity, personal gain over public service. The realization hit him like a truck. He wasn't a victim of a corrupt system. He was the corruption. He was the reason people lost faith in justice. He was the reason families lost their homes, and workers got sick, and small businesses failed. All of it, every single bit of suffering he had caused, was his choice. Judge Blackwood's vision began to blur. At first he thought something was wrong with his eyes, but then he realized he was crying. Tears were running down his face and he couldn't stop them. In all his years on the bench, he had never cried in front of anyone. Judges were supposed to be strong, composed, in control. But he wasn't in control anymore. He wasn't strong. He was just a broken man who had sold his soul for money and was finally understanding the true cost of what he had done. The tears came harder now, and his shoulders began to shake. He tried to wipe his face with his sleeve, but more tears kept coming. The black robe that had once made him feel powerful and important now felt like a costume he had no right to wear. People in the courtroom watched in stunned silence as this powerful man completely fell apart in front of them. Some felt satisfaction seeing him finally face the consequences of his actions. Others felt a strange kind of pity, watching a human being realize how far he had fallen. Patel continued to stand calmly at the witness table, giving the judge time to process what was happening. He had seen this kind of breakdown before when corrupt officials were finally confronted with the full scope of their crimes. The human mind could only maintain denial for so long before reality crashed through. Judge Blackwood looked down at his hands, the same hands that had signed countless corrupt rulings, the same hands that had counted bribe money under restaurant tables, the same hands that had destroyed lives for personal profit. These hands would never sign another judicial order. His career was over, his reputation was destroyed, and his freedom would soon be gone too. But worst of all, he finally understood that he deserved every bit of what was coming to him. The evidence wasn't just damning, it was true. Every word of it. And there was no one to blame but himself. The silence in the courtroom stretched on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. Judge Blackwood sat hunched over in his chair, tears streaming down his face as the full weight of his actions crashed down on him. His shoulders shook with quiet sobs, and everyone could see that this powerful man had been completely broken by the truth. Finally, he lifted his head and looked out at the packed courtroom. His eyes were red and swollen from crying, and his voice was barely above a whisper when he began to speak. The microphone picked up every word, carrying his broken voice to every corner of the room. He started, then stopped. He cleared his throat and tried again. I need to say something. I need to tell you all the truth. The courtroom was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Even the reporters stopped writing and looked up from their notebooks. Everyone knew they were about to witness something historic. A federal judge admitting to corruption in open court. Judge Blackwood wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and took a shaky breath. Mr. Patel, I owe you an apology. A sincere, heartfelt apology. Everything you've presented today is true. Every single piece of evidence, every recording, every document, it's all real. And I'm deeply, deeply sorry for trying to stop you from telling the truth. His voice broke again and he had to pause to compose himself. I shouted at you, I called you a liar. I tried to make people believe that your evidence was fake, but you were just doing your job, exposing corruption and fighting for justice. And I was terrified because I knew you were right. Patel nodded respectfully, but remained silent, allowing the judge to continue his confession. To everyone in this courtroom, Judge Blackwood continued, his voice getting stronger but still filled with emotion. I have betrayed your trust in the worst possible way. For years I have been taking bribes, accepting gifts, and selling my decisions to the highest bidder. I have corrupted the justice system that you depend on to protect you and your families. He looked directly at the elderly man in the third row, the one whose wife had died without proper medical treatment because of the judge's corrupt ruling. Sir, I remember your case. I remember your wife. I took money from the insurance company to rule against you, and because of my greed, your wife didn't get the treatment she needed. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The old man's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded slightly, acknowledging the apology even though the pain was still clear on his face. Judge Blackwood turned to address other people in the courtroom. To the small business owners who lost everything, because I ruled against you unfairly. To the workers who were injured because I dismissed your safety complaints. To the families who lost their homes because I took money from the banks. I destroyed your lives for my own personal gain, and I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. His voice was now steady, but the tears continued to flow. I told myself so many lies over the years. I convinced myself that everyone was corrupt, that this was just how the system worked. I told myself that I deserved the money because judges don't get paid enough, but those were all excuses. The truth is, I was greedy. I was selfish. I chose money over justice, and I hurt innocent people because of it. He paused to wipe his eyes again, then continued. I want everyone to understand that this corruption was my choice. Nobody forced me to take bribes. Nobody threatened me or my family. I did it because I wanted the money and I didn't care who got hurt in the process. That makes me not just a corrupt judge, but a bad person. The confession was devastating to hear. This wasn't just an admission of legal wrongdoing. It was a man completely dismantling his own character in front of hundreds of people. The reporters were frantically writing, knowing that this would be front-page news across the country. Also want to apologize to my fellow judges, Blackwood continued. The honest judges who work hard every day to uphold justice and serve the public. My actions have damaged the reputation of the entire judicial system. People will now question whether other judges can be trusted, and that's my fault. I've made your jobs harder, and I've made it harder for people to have faith in our courts. He took a deep breath and looked directly at the prosecution team. I also want to apologize to the prosecutors, the FBI agents, and everyone else who worked so hard to gather this evidence. You were doing your jobs, fighting corruption and protecting the public, and I was your enemy. I was the corruption you were fighting against. The judge then turned his attention to the court staff, the clerks, the stenographer, the bailiffs who had worked with him for years. To my court staff, I'm sorry that you had to find out this way that your boss was a criminal. You trusted me, you respected me, and I was lying to you every single day. You deserved better than that. His voice cracked again as he thought about his family. Most of all, I need to apologize to my wife and children. They're not here today, but they're watching this on television, and their world is falling apart right now. They had no idea where our money was really coming from. They thought I was an honest judge, a good husband and father, but I was living a lie. And now they're going to pay the price for my crimes. Judge Blackwood stood up slowly, his legs shaking. I want everyone to know that I take full responsibility for my actions. I'm not going to blame anyone else. I'm not going to claim that I was pressured or that I didn't understand what I was doing. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I did it anyway. He reached up and began to remove his black judicial robe, the symbol of his authority and position. I don't deserve to wear this robe anymore. I don't deserve to be called Your Honor. I don't deserve to sit in judgment of anyone because I've shown that I have no honor myself. The robe fell to the floor behind his chair, and he stood there in his regular clothes, looking smaller and more vulnerable than anyone had ever seen him. Effective immediately, I am resigning from the federal bench. I will never serve as a judge again. I will never have the power to hurt anyone else through corruption. He looked out at the courtroom one more time. I know that saying I'm sorry can't undo the damage I've done. It can't bring back the businesses that failed, the workers who got hurt, or the families who lost their homes. But I want you to know that I understand now how much pain I've caused, and I'm truly sorry. At that moment, the courtroom doors opened, and several FBI agents walked in. They had been waiting outside, giving the judge time to make his statement. Now it was time for the next phase of justice. Judge Blackwood saw them coming and nodded. I'm ready, he said quietly. I'm ready to face the consequences of what I've done. The lead FBI agent approached the bench. Harrison Blackwood, you're under arrest for bribery, corruption, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. As the agent read him his rights, the former judge listened quietly. He didn't resist or argue. He simply stood there, accepting what was happening to him. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, and he was led away from the bench where he had once held so much power. The courtroom remained silent as he was escorted out. Some people felt satisfaction seeing justice finally being served. Others felt sadness at watching a human being fall so far from grace. But everyone understood that this moment represented something important, that corruption would eventually be exposed, and that justice would eventually prevail. As the doors closed, behind the former judge, Kash Patel quietly packed up his evidence. His job was done. The truth had been told, and justice had been served.